Okay, welcome to the last lesson of the pre-Socratic philosophers. We're going to finish with Democritus, who was also known as the laughing philosopher. We'll see why a bit later. He's famous for coming up with the theory of atomism, which is of course what modern science is still based on. In some degrees perhaps it's not, and it's certainly different from what Democritus believed, because Democritus believed the atom was indivisible. Of course we don't. We believe that the atom can be split. Modern scientists, I think, would agree that the atom can be split. So it was a different theory, but nonetheless it has a lot of similarities to modern thought. Now, he said that it must be indivisible. Well, he believed that reality must be made of chunks which cannot be divided any further. He thought that they can't be divided further because if something is infinitely divisible, it leads us into a paradoxical conclusion. We can see it with Zeno's paradoxes, but Aristotle also speaks about it. If you take an extended object and try to infinitely divide that, what are you left with? You're either left with a number of extended objects, in which case you haven't infinitely divided it, or you're left with non-extended objects, and that doesn't make sense either, because an extended object can't be made of non-extended objects. And so perhaps this is why Democritus decided that there must be atoms. We can't say for certain because there's not much stuff left about his atomism. I mean, there are very few fragments. There are far more about his ethics, which is also interesting, but not so many about his atomism, unfortunately. But I assume that it was really Zeno's paradoxes which led him to this conclusion. And he also believed that the atoms were indestructible. I think this is because he agreed with Parmenides that something cannot come from nothing. And so there must be some element of reality which is indestructible, and he thought they were these little atoms. So they also differ only in terms of a few things, a couple of intrinsic properties like shape and size, and a couple of relational properties like position and arrangement in terms of other atoms. So they made a number of empirical observations to back these ideas up. They said that iron was made of, obviously, atoms which had hooks, which was why it held itself together so strong, whereas water was smooth and slippery atoms. Salt, I think, was sharp and pointy atoms because of the flavour. So they drew a number of conclusions even about properties, how these could change properties in the real world. Now, if we compare Democritus to these three guys, we can see how he differs. With Parmenides, Parmenides, you may remember, said that there is no empty space, that empty space or void is impossible. Democritus says the opposite. He says all there is in the whole universe is there are atoms and there is void, and that's all there is. And void must exist because otherwise the atoms wouldn't be able to move into different places. So the void must exist or movement is impossible. And Democritus obviously thought that movement was possible, unlike Parmenides. So he certainly believed in the void. He believed in empty space. Empedocles and Anaxagoras. Now, they both seem to, maybe not with Empedocles, it depends on what you believe, but Anaxagoras certainly had what we call a teleological principle. It means the universe was not just a mechanism. It was not just a mechanism which followed physical or scientific laws. It was also moved in some way. Now, Anaxagoras thought that the universe was moved from the initial position at the beginning. It was spun round by mind, by some kind of intentional, some kind of intelligence, with intention, with purpose, with some kind of aim. Democritus, from what we know of the fragments, he was a mechanist, he was a materialist, a determinist. And so this idea of atomism, you can see just using these 4 ideas, it's very mechanical. It's just shape, size, position, arrangement. So that's what perhaps how Democritus differs from Anaxagoras. He's not really famous for positing a teleological principle. But what do you think? Do you think there needs to be a teleological principle to explain how all of the many different forms around us came to be? Or do you think that they can just come to be by some kind of mechanical principles, just natural scientific laws? Of course, nowadays we have things like the theory of evolution, which claims to be non-teleological and explain everything just from random chance and mechanics. So these ideas are still important nowadays, and they're still argued about, of course. Okay. There's several other things. Perhaps let's go on to his ethics now. Perhaps that's enough about his atomism. But I'm a big fan of his atomism. I think that it's a very impressive way of modelling the world. It actually, when I think about what I learnt at school, I can see that a lot of we still use a lot of the similar kind of arguments for how things work, how things like heat work, or that kind of stuff. We certainly use the same kind of mechanisms. So his ethics, it's actually really interesting, a lot of what he says about ethics. He certainly emphasises these 4 things, it seems to me. Responsibility, first of all. He explains that people who commit bad acts, crimes, they feel miserable and suffer more than the victim. And so for Democritus, the universe is very fair. The evil are punished through the very bad acts themselves. They become miserable. So there's a strong emphasis on responsibility. He also says that good is given by the gods to everybody, good things, but evil, men run into that themselves. That it's very often their own fault. They're just blind judgment or poor judgment. So there's a strong emphasis on responsibility. He also claims that ease is the worst teacher, so he was obviously thought that education should be quite tough and quite strict. He tells us as well a lot about self-control. He says that greater desires lead to greater lacks, and you see this later with the Epicurus says exactly the same thing. The Stoics say this very often as well. So he has a big influence on later philosophy, certainly. Yes, self-control is certainly emphasized. Frugality as well, the idea that you should be content with what you have, and that it should be possible to be happy with actually very, very little. I admire this idea, and you find it later in the Stoics, and you find it in Epicurus. So it doesn't stop here. Lastly, he does talk about the soul. Hold on, what does he say about the soul? I'm forgetting. Oh, so yeah, he puts a lot of... he writes a couple of parts where he explains that the soul is more important than the body for health. There's a strong connection between healthy, unhealthy, and good and evil in Democritus. So I think he believes that evil leads to an unhealthy life and good leads to a healthy life, and the soul is more important than the body to become healthy. He explains that medicine heals diseases and wisdom heals the mind. Now, I believe he wrote some books on medicine as well, so he wrote books on all sorts of things, but unfortunately most of them have been lost. But anyway, it's interesting that he would mention soul so much, it seems to me, because nowadays atomists or materialists, they don't usually pay this so much attention. But I would have thought that he would have seen soul as a mechanical object in some way, perhaps as breath, which is the idea that when you stop breathing you die, and so your breath is your soul. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this lesson on Democritus. I don't know if I'll do any more. Easy thing about the pre-Socratics is that they don't write very long books, and so it's quite easy actually to do these lessons. It's not much preparation. But if I continue on to Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, I think that it will take me much longer. So if I do carry on, it will be much later in the future. Anyway, please subscribe if you like this lesson, and I hope to see you all soon.